I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the signatories to Treaty 7 and acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection and history with the land. 12 days ago, the Premier of Alberta deliberately sabotaged a booming industrial sector of our economy. At a time when Albertans are paying unprecedented electricity prices and struggling with unprecedented wildfires, Danielle Smith blocked construction of more than a dozen new, low-cost, low-emission power projects. She destroyed thousands of jobs in Alberta and blocked billions in new investment. She gave workers and investors exactly zero notice that any of this was coming. Danielle Smith may have permanently damaged the reputation of Alberta as a responsible and mature jurisdiction to invest in. Many Albertans are asking a very simple question. Why is the UCP doing this? All of the answers we got from Danielle Smith yesterday were lies. Let's go through them. First, Smith claimed that the Alberta Utilities Commission wrote to the government and requested a 6-month halt. That isn't true. The letter she referenced says no such thing. The letter says, quote, effective resolution necessarily requires a dedicated period of engagement with all stakeholders identified above, followed by government direction, either in the form of provincial policy or new legislation, end quote. That's a request for stakeholder engagement. Governments routinely do engagement and regulatory reviews. They do so without shutting down an entire industry. The letter does not request a halt or a pause or a moratorium. This is immediately obvious to anyone who has read it. Any claim to the contrary is a lie, one told by Danielle Smith. Next, Smith claimed the Alberta Electric System Operator, the AESO, requested the pause. This one is also a lie. The AESO letter clearly says, thank you for telling us about the moratorium. We will follow the direction. No request, no praise for the idea. All of that is a pure fabrication by Smith. And there's more. As Dr. Andrew Leach at the University of Calgary first pointed out, there are timeline inconsistencies. Michael Law, the president of the Alberta Electric System Operator, wrote to Nathan Neudorf thanking him for the heads up about the moratorium. The letter is dated July 21st and was signed on July 20th. That's 2 weeks before the moratorium was announced publicly. Danielle Smith and Nathan Neudorf knew they were going to halt more than a dozen industrial projects for at least 2 weeks. But they did no consultation in that time. They made no attempt to learn about the impacts of their decision or to talk to anyone. Nathan Neudorf claimed he was unable to meet with the renewable industry leaders in Alberta or people considering investing here because of scheduling glitches. What kind of scheduling glitch could prevent a single meeting in 2 weeks? That's a pretty tall tale. The message sent to investors and to the business community is clear. The rules and processes in Alberta can and do change overnight with no notice. And the UCP government has absolutely no qualms when it comes to lying about the reasons for those changes. It's a poisonous message to send to investors around the world, and we know that it will have detrimental effects. Who knows what explanation Smith will come up for the moratorium with today? If there really was a regulatory justification for the moratorium, Smith would be willing to have that conversation publicly. We clearly can't take her word for anything, so let's convene a hearing. But they've denied all cause for the hearing. We could hear from the AUC, from the AESO, from business, capital, landowners with projects on their land. Most importantly, I think we need to hear from the workers, the people whose jobs Danielle Smith dismissed out of hand with no regard at all. I was really disgusted by Smith's answer when a reporter asked what she had to say to those Albertans whose jobs she had shut down for 6 months. She just shrugged and said, "It's 6 months." That's an insult to those hardworking Albertans. These Albertans want to work. They want to do the jobs that they had until Smith took them away. They want to build these power projects, and Albertans need them to build the power projects. Danielle Smith's actions are going to delay the introduction of thousands of megawatts of low-cost electricity. Her decisions will drive up the price for Alberta families and for businesses. Blocking these renewable power plants will also contribute to emissions that will damage our environment. Danielle Smith and the UCP are hurting our economy, and they can't even explain why. Enough is enough. It's time for the UCP's ban on renewable energy projects to end before irreversible damage is done to investor confidence. This is about securing our economic future. This is about supporting the working people of Alberta who are looking for a plan to create good-paying jobs now and into the future. Alberta can be a leader in all forms of energy, but not with this incompetent government standing in the way. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person, then go to questions online.
What are Albertans telling you after yesterday's press conference?
Well, I think people are extremely skeptical about the reasons that she's given. You know, first she claimed it was a letter from the AUC, which clearly doesn't ask for a moratorium or a pause or anything of the sort. Then she claimed it was from the ASO, but their letter is essentially a thank you for telling us letter. So it's pretty clear that the reasons that have been given are not the actual reasons. And if you're going to block investment in a province, and particularly if you're going to block it in this way, this is something that's going to send shocks throughout the investment world, right? When investors are looking about what jurisdiction to put their money in, one of the first things they're going to consider is whether the rules are going to suddenly change and make their investment worthless. While this is exactly that sort of situation where the rules have suddenly changed, and that has a huge impact on investment. So I think people are concerned, and I think they're confused, and I think they're owed an explanation.
City News. I asked Danielle Smith yesterday about the layoffs because the companies will find business elsewhere. But what about the people, the Albertans that she's fighting for with Ottawa? What is going to happen to them? They'll be laid off. They won't have anything to do. How will they survive in this inflation? What does NDP has to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was the most problematic answer amongst a series of extremely problematic answers in her press conference yesterday. You know, these are real people trying to support their families, trying to survive in an inflationary crisis. And, you know, her response to here are people who are probably going to lose their jobs was, oh, well, it's only 6 months. I mean, can any of us survive without income for 6 months at this point? I think it just shows a government that's completely out of touch with what's happening in the lives of everyday Albertans, and that really doesn't seem to understand that they're here to represent those Albertans, not just, you know, far right-wing extremists, but everyday Albertans whose, you know, major concern is how do I put food on the table? How do I afford my electricity bill? And she doesn't seem to understand that she needs to stand for those people at all.
Any questions?
I found it interesting that she made a statement about the wind turbines and that they have to look, you remember? You know, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, my reaction is this is a government that was literally fine with removing a ban from the 1970s to allow strip mining in the mountains. So strip mines are apparently okay, but we're concerned about, you know, a wind turbine potentially blocking the view. I mean, I think it's an absurd justification, as absurd, you know, as any of her justifications.
The Premier did actually mention maybe a bit of appetite for pooling resources with other Western provinces to generate more electricity and share electricity. What is your reaction to that? What's the NDP stance on possibly pooling those resources?
Yeah, I actually think that more interties is probably a good thing, particularly here in Alberta. We don't have the same kind of hydro resources that they necessarily do in other provinces. So I think, interties are definitely one of the solutions. They're one of the solutions that most folks, with expertise in the grid are telling us is going to be necessary. But I think there'll be a whole realm of solutions to decarbonizing the grid, but that's definitely one of them. Is one that we should be looking at, and I think a wise government would be advocating to the federal government right now, saying, this is your regulation, and you should be putting up some of the capital to build those interties, because they will be expensive, but necessary.
Have you had any conversations with Premier Eby about Site C?
Not directly, no, but it is, that is definitely one possibility, is sort of interties going through to BC, interties going in the other direction. I think storage is potentially a thing as well that really wasn't discussed yesterday, but is going to be a big part of the solution. Presently the UCP hasn't they put in legislation, but they haven't taken the steps to allow that onto the grid. So there are a lot of things that are going to be necessary. There are a lot of possible paths forward, but I think, the bottom line is what they're doing in terms of this moratorium on renewables. That's not taking us forward. It's taking us backwards.
So what's the way forward now? What is your demand from UCP?
Right now, we would like to see them remove the moratorium on renewables, and we'd like to see an inquiry. We'd like to see, a public forum in which all of this can come out, because this is incredibly troubling in terms of the message it sends to investment. The policy itself is bad, but the fact that we have a premier running around lying to Albertans with no compunction, giving sort of transparently false justifications, I think that's also a concern. And so I think we deserve to hear what the actual justification for this was.
Okay, we'll move to questions on the line, then we can go back to in person if there are more. Just a reminder, if you're joining by Zoom, to use the raise hand function, and if you're joining by phone, to press *9. First question goes to Alex McQuaig.
I'm going to look at this maybe a different way, and maybe just take the Premier's comments at face value regarding these letters. What do you think it says about the capacities of Michael Law and Carolyn Dole-Rees to request a 6-month pause in such a bizarre fashion?
Well, I don't think it looks like they requested a pause at all. But even if they requested a review of regulations, this is something the government does every day. The PC government did it before us. We did it when we were in government. The UCP government does it all the time too. Governments review regulations. They convene stakeholders. They bring everyone together. They have conversations about how to change exactly these sorts of rules, and they do it without shutting down the industry. The UCP under Premier Kenney in their last term, reviewed the regulations around, for instance, how much spend had to go out on reclaiming orphan wells. They did it without shutting anything down. And this is, it's very usual. It's the literal function of government to do these sorts of reviews, and you can't stop the world while you do them.
Was there a follow-up, Alex?
Yeah, actually, I've got 2 questions I'm hoping to, one just following up on that last question, and another I think is extremely important that hasn't been covered yet. But just following up on that question, AUC and ASO, they are not contradicting that what the Premier said, that these letters represent a request for a 6-month pause. Taking at face value, can you comment on the competency of these 2 individuals who head important regulatory bodies in our province requesting in such a bizarre fashion a 6-month pause?
So I can't comment necessarily directly on their competencies. I don't know whether they've been asked about the letters or why they haven't chosen to make public statements on that. You would have to ask them. I do think it may have to do with sort of the duty of government officials not to kind of sort of speak for the government, if you will, although these are independent agencies in their own way. I mean, yeah, you'd really have to ask them why they haven't been in a position to comment further on this sort of thing. But I do think from the perspective of the government, from the perspective of the thing that sort of we can control as legislators, I do think that the UCP owes that explanation to Albertans. So I do think that we should look to convene an inquiry so we can ask exactly those questions.
It was the worst wildfires across Canada.
Sorry, yeah, just final question, and thanks for indulging. You mentioned the coal ban being lifted, but I know the prairies may not be as sexy as the Rocky Mountains, but this review will also be lifting the ban on native grasslands, which is the most endangered ecosystem in North America. This review seems to open the door to development of renewables on the most highly endangered ecosystem on the continent. Do you have any comments about that?
So my understanding of the current ban on renewables is that nothing will happen for 6 months. In terms of what happens at the end of the review, in terms of sort of where projects are located, I'm not sure what the outcome of the review will be. I'm not even really sure why the government's doing it, so it's difficult for me to comment on that.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll go to our next caller. Go ahead, caller, your line is open.
Hi there, it's Colin Gallant phoning from the Medicine Hat News. I'm just wondering if I can take this in a little bit of a different direction for a moment. The federal fuel standard or electricity standards, and obviously there's a large disagreement between the province and the federal government about what that entails or the timelines, etc. There's a lot of federal money on the table right now for utilities, traditional utilities, to modernize. What sort of, it looks like we're going to be in some sort of protracted negotiation now with the province. What sort of signal does that send to the traditional or, fossil utility companies that are perhaps looking to modernize? And are you afraid that that will, discourage investment decisions?
I'm very concerned that this fight between the federal and provincial governments will discourage investment. What investment likes to see is clear signals. There are folks considering things like hydrogen plants or various other things. It's difficult to know for sure, but if people don't know what the rules are going to be, if people don't know what the objective is, because you have federal and provincial governments that are more interested in fighting with each other than they are in acting in the interests of Albertans, I think that becomes extremely problematic because we can't get the investments we need in the time frame we need. I think what the government should be doing right now is sitting down with the federal government, talking about any things that need to be potentially dealt with, but in particular they should be advocating for investment in Alberta to ensure that we can reach those goals.
Is there a follow-up, Colin?
Yes, the Danielle Smith has talked a lot about how this is focused on cost to consumers. We have in the background, it seems like there's going to be some sort of discussion about the RRO, which is probably more directly or more urgently sort of targeted at costs than, talking about investment decisions that are going to be built in 3 or 4 years. Now, at some points, she's hinted at the potential of, buying large amounts of baseload power or providing some sort of, what sounds to me anyway, like a capacity market. Can you comment on, we've gone back and forth, the NDP had a plan for capacity and not. What's the way to lower bills, I guess, from the NDP standpoint?
We, in the last election, we weren't looking to move us away from the current energy market. I think there are ways to essentially contract, and we see some of this in Texas, which is one of the jurisdictions that has a similar market. There are ways to potentially contract for what we're looking for, essentially dispatchability of power to sort of shave those peaks without necessarily moving back. But, all of these are things that need to be happening very expeditiously. And for some reason, rather than focusing on the problems right in front of them, the problems of cost, the problems of, ensuring exactly that, this government seems instead to be focused on this, moratorium on renewable energy. And I think it's extremely problematic. I think there are a lot of, potential pathways and a lot of new technologies that can help with this project. I think that Alberta can be a leader for, years into the future in all forms of energy, but we do need to take advantage. We do need to capitalize on investment. And right now the signals we're sending are to send investment, to other places. And I think that that's, perhaps to the benefit of Saskatchewan, but definitely not to the benefit of Alberta.
Okay, next question goes to Catherine Grakowski.
Great, thanks for taking my question. So you say it's the literal function of government to review these regulations, you can't stop the world. The Premier yesterday said that this moratorium is necessary because it would be unfair to make a bunch of approvals and then a few months down the road there's completely different rules. So how would that normally be handled in situations where you're going to change the rules, but world needs to keep turning, as you say? What's the way to go about that?
So normally you'd sort of do a policy regulatory review internally, and the government would go out and do a bunch of consultations with stakeholders, with folks that are impacted by this, with people who are investing, people who have jobs on the line, with agencies like the AUC and the ASO to sort of determine what needs to be done, potentially with some experts in the area. And so those conversations would be ongoing. People would know that there was a change coming, right? What's really damaging about the decision that's been made in this case is that she did change the rules, and she did it without any consultation at all, and zero notice. So that has a huge impact on the lives and livelihoods of people here in Alberta.
Is there a follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, and I'm wondering what you touched on it a bit, but what do you hope to get out of a public inquiry that you couldn't get from, say, a FOIP, or what is it that you're hoping to get out of a public inquiry?
Well, I think we would like to hear from the people affected. We have the Premier standing up, and first she says, oh, well, it's the AUC that asked for it, but clearly they didn't. And then she says, well, it's the ASO that asked for it, but clearly they didn't. So I think, what we deserve is to understand how this decision was made and what's going to be done in the future to make better decisions. I think, we do deserve to potentially hear from the folks that wrote that letter about, what it was they intended. We deserve to hear as well from, investors and from industry on what kind of impact this is going to have. And I think we deserve to hear from the everyday Albertans who work on these projects.
Okay, we'll go back to some questions in the room. Okay, no more questions? Good, okay. Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions on the line. And seeing none, that's all for today.
Thanks very much.